Sex can be broken down into 3 stages: the seeking of sex, the action of sex, and ejaculating. Now, which of these stages increases your levels of testosterone? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest and greatest conversation where we will be discussing hormones. Now, specifically testosterone. To top it off, I'm going to be going through some research papers and articles surrounding the rise in anabolic steroid use and abuse, some of the effects of having low testosterone and high testosterone, some herbs that can affect testosterone, supplements that don't affect testosterone, but some that do. So let's just jump right in. Hormones are essentially chemical messengers that get released by specialized glands called endocrine glands into the bloodstream, and then they go around, float around, go to their target sites, which could be, organs or specific tissues where they can become, functionally active and do their job. Hormones can be produced in the pituitary gland, aka the master gland, and it's called the master gland because it releases hormones to go to another place and tell them to release even more hormones. Pretty cool. So hormones can be produced in many places. I'll give you some examples, like the adrenal glands, the ovaries, testes, the thyroid, the pancreas. There's so many places, and hormones regulate everything. And when I mean everything, I mean everything from pooping to eating, from drinking to vomiting, from sleeping to waking up, to sex and no sex. The range of effects are astounding, but unfortunately we're gonna have to leave pooping and vomiting for another time. Let's jump right into testosterone. Now, before we jump into the fun stuff, I do want to remind you to please subscribe. It makes me happier, much happier than you'd think. And if you do want to check out the research papers and articles, you can find them down in the description. Now, most testosterone is produced in the testes by the substrates cholesterol and acetate. Some of the testosterone gets produced in the hypothalamus, which is a part of your brain. Now, how that works is through a pathway called the hypothalamic pituitary axis pathway. And essentially, the hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH. GnRH then sort of swings by the pituitary gland, tells it to release luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone then goes down all the way down to the testes and gives the green light to produce testosterone. Simple as that. Finally, a tiny amount of testosterone can be produced in the zona reticularis of the adrenal gland, and does this indirectly. It's sort of a mechanism that you don't really need to know, don't want to talk about it, but there are 3 ways that your body can produce testosterone, right? So we talked about the testes, the hypothalamus, part of your brain, and the adrenal gland. In our body, testosterone is an accumulation of various forms, specifically 3 forms. First of all, we have testosterone bound to albumin, which is a carrier protein. About 54% of it is that. Then we have the testosterone bound to SHBG, or sex hormone binding globulin, and that's about 44%. And then finally, we have what everyone loves to talk about, free testosterone, and that's about 2%. And free testosterone is essentially what it sounds like. It's not bound to anything. It's going through your bloodstream looking for something to bind to, and usually that's your androgenic receptors. And free testosterone is what actually measures your active, right? So it's always ready to go. So now that we've talked about what testosterone is, let's jump into some of the good stuff, because I know some of you people are impatient and you just want to get right in there. So let's jump into the rise in anabolic steroid use and abuse. Now, there was a time when an unknown component known to us as testosterone was once called the elixir of life. Have any of you ever wondered how anabolic steroids became a thing? Well, it's definitely not the Olympics. Let's travel back in time, specifically to 1889, back when medical sterilization was just becoming a thing. Back then, when the streets were kind of filthy. I mean, I wasn't there, but let's just assume it was. Just trying to. A time that was almost 150 years ago. A time when a man, a myth, the legend, Charles Brown Sequard lived in. Now, Charles Brown Sequard, to this day, has a diagnosis that he crafted of his own that's still used in trauma-related neurology called Brown-Sequard syndrome. Very fancy. However, in this case, Brown-Sequard, the mad scientist that he is, at his time, when he was 72 years old, I'm assuming he just got bored, but he decided to get a liquid extract from the testes of dogs and guinea pigs. He then decided to inject himself with that extract 10 times over the span of 3 weeks. Now, what Brown-Sequard was able to record was increased forearm strength, more forcible urinary stream, better cognitive ability, and the ability to defecate more easily. What a strange man. Now let's go through the basics, because I know and you know we love going systematically. So what does anabolic mean? Anabolic means the use of energy to promote growth and regulate constructive metabolism in the body. Okay, so now what does anabolic steroid use and abuse mean? Now, it is what it sounds like. It's the use and abuse of it. But the reason why it's called that is because about 30% of people that use steroids develop dependence. And so what happens here in the case of use and abuse is that they continue to use it despite knowing the consequences. Now, I'm going to give you a good example of what I mean by dependency. So there's a good study out there that was done on hamsters, and it's unfortunately funny to me because the hamsters would self-inject themselves to near death, and in some cases, death. The team that did the study sort of understood that there must be a feeling in what they thought was a hedonic or euphoric feeling. Now, in humans, steroids aren't like MDMA and psychedelics. You're not going to be walking around smiling, having a good time. In my experience of hearing, seeing, and reading, you find that a lot of people that use steroids get this greater sense of confidence, right? Self-confidence. They get this feeling of invincibility. Now, those feelings are rewarding feelings, and those feelings may actually be the reason why these people develop dependency. Now, just to add some salt on the wound, there was a study done on 198 elite athletes where they measured the fear, consequences, their thoughts of, the thoughts behind the use of anabolic steroids. Now, unbelievably, the study found that 98% of those elite athletes would use these steroids or performance enhancing drugs if they knew they weren't going to get caught. 98%. Now, I mean, that's not the worst part. The worst part is that 61% said that they would still use it knowing that they would die in 5 years. Now, that to me is sad. The main effects of androgens is muscle hypertrophy, and the way it does it is through the increase in both type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers, the increase in number of capillaries that go to those muscle fibers, and the increase in myocytes that are in those muscle fibers. Protein synthesis can increase by about 37% if you're exercising while using steroids, but it can still increase by 10% if you're not exercising. Now, the muscles in our neck, our shoulders, our and the thorax area, and our arms have a lot more of receptors, the androgen receptors. So essentially what I'm trying to say is the reason why steroid users get very big up here, but they still have what you would call chicken legs, is because of this. And in general, your muscles will return to their initial size or just above the initial size in about 12 weeks of stopping or suspension of the steroids. Now, throughout this video, we will be essentially pooping on steroid users, but I think that we need to take a step back here and sort of sympathize with them, because from the papers that I've read and seen, it does seem that there is a sort of psychological factor that comes into play here. And, the more I read about it, the more it looked like there might also be a pathological reason behind it. So there might be an actual mental illness here. And so I read some papers done by psychiatrists, and I want to quote a few things from them because it's pretty interesting stuff. So a paper done by the psychiatrists, and you can check it out down in the description, said, even if anabolic androgenic steroid users do not suffer from outright muscle dysmorphia, they very often experience at least some form of pathology related to body image. Now, I'd like to add two more things that I found, one of them being vigorexia. Now, vigorexia just means the fear of showing your body in public, right? And I don't want you to self-diagnose this if you're a teenager or young adult, because that's sort of, leaning toward an insecurity, right? So even me, when I was younger, I was a bit, on the chub side. I would have those thoughts as well. They're just these thoughts in the back. They're just like, they're creeping, like, don't take off your shirt. You're fat. There's another pathology called bigorexia, and it's in the name, really, where people that are essentially healthy, or they have big bodies, maybe, they might be swollen as hell, they still think that they're not. And that's what bigorexia is. Oh, and by the way, I'm really, these definitions that I'm giving you are very, they're not very professional, I know. It's just to help it kind of stick and sit in your mind, help you understand better. That's why I'm explaining it these ways. Just a little disclaimer. Now, the same paper I mentioned earlier had another quote that I got that was really nice. And it said, persuading anabolic androgenic steroid users to stop using the drugs and potentially lose muscle is often as difficult as persuading patients with anorexia that they need to gain weight. Pretty good stuff. Now, the rise in anabolic steroid use in teenagers is becoming more and more worrying, and there are many reasons why, and I'm going to be jumping into these right now. So in this age group that already lives with anxiety, insecurities, trouble expressing, and essentially stuck on their phones, their mobile phones. By the way, I'm not a boomer. I have no problem with you being on your phone all day. That's your problem. I can give you my opinions about it, but at the end of the day, it's very unlikely that a guy sitting here on YouTube is going to tell you to get off your phone and you're going to do it. The problem here is the state of social media algorithms. Now, you see, a lot of these people that you or your nephew or your brother or cousin sees on social media, where they're swole, shredded, veins, and whoa, they are most likely on supplements, on steroids. They might have the perfect lightings, camera work, a team with it. There's so many factors that come into play. And if I was a 14, 15, 16, whatever teen-year-old, and I'm scrolling through social media and all I can see is these jacked dudes, it will, whether they want to accept it or not, and they're probably not even aware of it, but it is going to affect my mental health. It's going to make me think like, I'm not good enough. I'm not big enough. I'm not veiny enough. And so that is my problem. The outcome of that effect is variable. It could go many ways, but, whether it goes into some, crazed dark horse motivation where they just pump it out at the gym, or they develop a whole new level of insecurity. The outcome is not really my concern here. My concern is that social media is playing a role in pushing teenagers towards the use of steroids. And that is a fact. And I'm going to back these facts with some statistics that I found. Now, mind you, they might not be the most recent statistics, but they are credible. And here I'm going to read them out to you. So the Youth Risk and Behavior Surveillance System estimated that in US high schools, 4.9% of males and 2.4% of females have used anabolic steroids at least once in their lifetime. Oh, but Dr. Atilla, that's such a small amount. How is that? If you change those percentage to numbers, actual numbers in thousands, you're looking at hundreds of thousands, by the way. But let's just jump into the other points here. Now, the statistics I read to you just now were done in 2017. I'm sure that there are going to be more credible and, more recent studies that are going to be coming out very soon, because this is becoming a whole epidemic. Another thing is that society still looks down on steroid users, whether you like it or not, right? And so there's a whole hidden class of numbers that we can't see in the statistics, in the population. There's so many people that are using steroids that deny the use. So that's another point here that I need you to focus on. And my third point, it's not really backed by any science, but I do think you can agree with me. I want you to close your eyes and remember 2017. How was it back then? How was social media algorithms back then? How important was this whole, alpha male bravado that was going on back then? It wasn't a thing back then. And so I think that the numbers are much higher than we can see now. And studies will be coming out very soon. I really hope that they do some studies, because as a guy that has the social media algorithm is sort of focused towards cars and gym goers, I find a lot of jokes on the comments about, Trenbolone now, and it's becoming a meme basically with the younger generation, and it's becoming funny. And once we start making things funny, that's when it becomes normal. And once it's normal, there you go. Now, the adverse effects of using steroids as a teenager includes acne, liver and kidney dysfunction. We're looking at neurological changes. We're looking at unfavorable changes in your lipid profile. And we're looking at something which I think you'd love to hear if you're a teenager listening to this or watching this, how there is an early closure of epiphyseal plates. Now, what are epiphyseal plates? Now, I don't want to, stray off too much, but epiphyseal plates of your long bones dictate how tall you can become, right? And obviously there's a lot of factors, specifically genetics, but let's just assume that this is the case here. Now, if you are taking testosterone, you will increase estrogen with it, right? So testosterone and estrogen are like brother and sister, right? So they kind of follow each other, not in terms of the amount, but in their respective ratios. They kind of move together like that. And the main hormone that decides when it needs to stop the growth of the epiphyseal plates is estrogen. And so if I started taking estrogen, right, and I was a teenager when I was hitting my growth spurts, the estrogen rise would go and hit the bones and tell them, hey, it's time to stop growing. And so I need you to be careful with that. But enough about teenagers. Let's jump into adults, because you can't run away from me. A German study found that 13.5% of gym goers had used steroids at least once in their life. It's a pretty high number. Let's jump into another one here, where there's an Iranian study where they found the percentage of bodybuilders that used performance-enhancing drugs were 51.4%. And of that 51.4%, 79.8% were using anabolic steroids. Now, I do want to remind you that the statistics you're going to be finding online about steroid use, they're not done through blood tests. They're questionnaires. So again, this comes back to my point earlier. It's very easy for someone to be like, no, I don't use steroids. And they'd be like, okay, this guy doesn't use steroids, moving on to the next guy. That's how these statistics come out. Now, about 98% of anabolic androgenic steroid users are male. But just because it's that doesn't mean that the females can get away from us. So the 2% that do use anabolic steroid use should know that the side effects of using them include acne, of course, male pattern temporal baldness. We're looking at changes in your menstrual cycle, including dysmenorrhea and amenorrhea, which is just, whether it's a change in the cycle or the complete halt. We have breast atrophy. The effects could also include hair recession, deepening of the voice, and clitoromegaly. Now that I've sort of killed the vibe in the room, let's kill it even more. Let's go and talk about the effects of having low or high testosterone. So in my next video, you're going to be hearing about how growth hormone begins to deplete at the age of 30. In this case, testosterone unfortunately follows in its footsteps. Testosterone levels begin to deplete at about 1% per year after the age of 30. So you might hear low testosterone being called hypogonadism or late onset androgen deficiency. But in this case, let's just stick to low T and high T. Low T in men was associated with depression, diabetes, reduced quality of life, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, obesity. Let's take Laughlin et al. Study here, where they observed over a 12-year period how low testosterone affects men versus high testosterone. And they found that the men with low testosterone had a 40% greater likelihood of dying. And this was also done after controlling, age, lifestyle, and obesity. Another study by Pai et al. Found that there was a 5-fold greater increase in the risk of dying in men with low testosterone. And again, in this study, they also had the other external variables under control. That included obesity, lifestyle, and age. Further studies have validated findings showing that men with low testosterone are associated with increased incidence of metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, peripheral artery disease, and cerebrovascular disease. Now, you may be inclined to say, okay, why don't we just start testosterone replacement therapy or TRT? Now, there is a lot of, controversy in the literature. I mean, there's conflicting results as well. But, from what I found was that patients that took TRT had an increased risk of exacerbating pre-existing medical diseases. And in this case, it would be, cardiovascular diseases. It would be if you had apnea, prostate disease. So a paper by Matsuda and associates found that having a greater serum level of testosterone had an increased risk of developing thrombotic events. And what do we mean by that? We just mean that, it's to do with blood clots, right? So if you'd have an increased risk of having a stroke, a heart attack, a deep vein thrombosis, and these are all very dangerous things. And so they demonstrated that having high level of testosterone would sort of augment the receptors for thromboxane A2. And thromboxane A2, it's not very important for you to know, but it is a big boy in the blood clot formation. Now, patients may experience infertility secondary to testosterone use. And the way this happens is through a negative feedback mechanism. And we're going to be talking about the mechanism here and there, but just so we're on the right page, I want to talk about what the mechanism is. And so, do you remember how we talked about the hypothalamic pituitary axis pathway? And so, essentially, what happens here is if I'm getting testosterone from outside or inside or whatever, if my testosterone levels are high, the testes are going to send signals up to the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and say, hey, we've got testosterone, man. We don't need to keep producing more. So this is what happens here, is if you're taking testosterone from outside, right, the body is not going to think, oh, testosterone, I'm making testosterone, you're bringing testosterone, we're all testosterone, let's just go. work together. It's not going to be thinking like that. Our body is very primal. Our body is going to be, I see, I do, ooga booga booga. That's how our body works. And so this is called negative feedback. Now we've talked about all the negative effects of using testosterone as therapy. Let's jump into some of the positive things, shall we? Let's bring a smile back on our faces. Speaking about smiling, I want you to close your eyes and think about a man on steroids. What do you see? You're probably seeing a huge guy that's angry. I don't know why. Now that is the sad reality. There is no denying it. There's plenty of literature out there that shows and proves that men that take steroids for personal gain, right, so anabolic steroids, have mood swings, bipolar disorders, they get rampant and aggressive. But it's not all veins popping and getting angry. In a 2-month study of 51 hypogonadal men, testosterone therapy was initiated, and they measured every 20 days the mood parameters of the person. So that would include things like, positive feeling, well-being, happiness, anger, irritability, nervousness. And so they found that the TRT actually improved their cognitive ability, they improved their well-being, their positivity, but it also decreased the anger and nervousness. Interesting stuff. I want to just add on to this that testosterone can actually reduce levels of anxiety. And the way it does this is through one word, the amygdala. Nani? Very serious face, I'm sorry. But the amygdala is a part of your brain that sort of measures and reacts to your levels of anxiety and stress. And testosterone is going to come right in, a little knock on the door, and say, hey, bud, you don't need to be so stressful. We're good. Take it down a notch, thereby reducing the threshold of anxiety and fear. Now, remarkably, a randomized double-blinded study done in the United Kingdom found that low-dose transdermal testosterone significantly improved the ECG signs, which are the electrographic signs, the things they stick on, and pain perception in patients with chronic stable angina, which is a heart condition, particularly in men with a low baseline concentration of testosterone. Now, if you've caught on the wave by now, you understand that I'm trying to tell you that if you have low testosterone, you'll have some negative effects, and then taking testosterone as a therapy will improve aspects of your life, things like your cognitive abilities, your feelings, your positivity. Some of the effects on your heart can improve. I mean, you're looking at good stuff. But again, this has to do with you having a low baseline testosterone, and you're taking testosterone as a therapy to normalize it. If you are taking testosterone when your testosterone levels are normal and you are healthy, then it's not therapy, okay? Because I've seen people that say they're on TRT when they're normal, when they're healthy. You are using it as for personal gain. And it's none of my business. So now that we're halfway throughout the video, let's get into some of the gooder stuff. It's not even a word. But what improves or increases your levels of testosterone? Now, before we jump into the mechanisms, and sort of complex, cool, new things, I want you to just, I want to get you in the zone, in the flow. I want to remind you of some of the good stuff you already know. So things like compound workouts, high caloric diets, high fats in your diets, things like magnesium, zinc, vitamin D. Sex can also improve them. But let's jump into some of the nice mechanisms that I want to talk about. Now let's take a step back and look at our fellow mammals that roam Mother Earth with us. Let's look at mammals, like lions, tigers, rhinos, hippos, elephants, mammals with antlers, rams, whatever it is. You see that the stronger they are, the more prone they are to have sex and reproduce. Okay, you're probably thinking, the animals with higher levels of testosterone, they tend to compete more, they tend to be more aggressive. That means that they get more sex, yada yada. Sure, but I want you to also look at it like this. Competition itself actually increases your levels of testosterone. Now, does winning or losing matter? Yes, it kind of does, because the winning feeling that you get is actually related to dopamine, right? And that's released at the hypothalamus. Now, the release of dopamine, can actually stimulate the hypothalamus as well, right? So you're indirectly increasing your levels of GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, which was again in the hypothalamic pituitary axis pathway down to your testes to produce testosterone. So you winning could actually stimulate more testosterone release. But if you think you're a loser or you have a bad rep of being a loser, I don't want you to worry, because competing in itself can actually increase your levels of testosterone. So if you're losing, I don't want you to go home and sit and stop doing that activity. No, I want you to keep going. Keep being that competitive little animal that you are, mammal. How does sex and sexual behavior affect our testosterone levels? Now, when I was a kid, I remember that people used to say that ejaculation means you're shooting out testosterone. Now, that is not true. Sex can be broken down into 3 stages: the seeking of sex, the action of sex, and ejaculating. Now, which of these stages increases your levels of testosterone? That's right. Seeking and the action of sex itself will increase your levels of testosterone. Ejaculation releases prolactin. Well, I don't really like prolactin. You shouldn't either. Well, he's still our part of the family of the hormones of ours, but we don't like him in this video of testosterone. Prolactin is sort of the hormone that gives you a little break. So once you ejaculate, prolactin is going to start pumping out, and it's going to tell your body like, hey, whoa, let's take it easy. We're good. We don't need it anymore. A little pat on the back. Good job. Have a seat. So that's what prolactin does. The refractory period caused by prolactin, it varies from men to men. So it actually depends on the amount of prolactin that your body releases and the duration of its stay in your system. But what about pornography? Now, if you are the viewer or the cameraman, you can increase your levels of testosterone. But of course, if you are the partaker in said pornography, you would increase it even more. Okay, so now let's get into the opposite of pornography, which is abstinence from pornography and sex. And they found that after a week of abstinence from sex, I'm just gonna say ejaculating and watching any sort of stimulant here, they found that there was a 400% increase in your levels of testosterone after just a week. So all in all, let's close this chapter by saying that sex itself increases your levels of testosterone. Viewing pornography will increase your levels of testosterone, but abstinence from sex and pornography will increase it even more. A fascinating physiological way of increasing your levels of testosterone is through sunlight. Who would have thought? But having a few minutes of sunlight, more preferably in the morning, when you first wake up, but generally speaking, just sunlight itself, coming through your eyes, through your skin, can increase your levels of dopamine. And we talked earlier about how dopamine gets released from the hypothalamus. What else gets released from the hypothalamus? GnRH. So if you release dopamine, it can indirectly increase the levels of GnRH, which also down the line will increase levels of testosterone. And another way that sunlight can increase levels of testosterone is sort of by balancing your circadian rhythm, right? So your sleep cycle. And you sleep earlier, you get better sleep. So again, better sleep in most cases, no, all the time, having good sleep, whether it's quantity or quality, doesn't matter. Having good sleep will always be beneficial to your body, and in this case it will increase your levels of sex hormones. Moving onwards to the new trends of ice bath, ice showers, cold exposure, and also, I found that they were also selling on Amazon ice pack underwear. Pretty cool stuff. But yeah, so the way that can increase your levels of testosterone is a bit woo-wah. Meaning I didn't really find anything that was seriously credible, but there was a YouTuber that I watched called Dr. Andrew Huberman. He's a well-respected neuroscientist at Stanford. He has a plausible explanation. He said that he calls it the rebound hypervasodilation, and essentially what happens here is when your gonads are exposed to cold temperatures, they become very constricted, they shrivel up, and when you bring them back to normal temperature or even warmer temperatures, the blood vessels there begin to dilate even more than what they would normally do for a short amount of time. And in that time frame, you'd find that a lot of nutrients, proteins, signaling hormones, carrier proteins, they all sort of flow in much more easily, so that can increase your levels of testosterone. So we've talked about the positives of what increases your levels of testosterone, but what about the negatives and what decreases your testosterone? So again, I'm going to be going through the same format where we talk about the basics, which we probably already know, and then jump into more, complex mechanisms. And so some of the things include rapid weight loss, bad sleeping habits. Again, we talked about that earlier, so that includes quantity and quality. We're looking at alcohol, cortisol. Now, cortisol, as we know, is our friendly neighborhood stress hormone. Sometimes not friendly though, and in this case not. Cortisol, if you go to the gym, you need to be working out for about 75 minutes. You don't want to be pushing it too much after that, because then your cortisol levels begin to increase, and if your cortisol begins to increase, your testosterone begins to decrease. And another point that I want to mention is you should keep your strength and resistance training before your cardio workouts, because cardio workouts will increase levels of testosterone, and you don't want that, so you don't want to be doing them in the beginning. Opioids can decrease levels of testosterone. They do that by disrupting the gonadotropin releasing hormone, the GnRH, in the hypothalamus. Now you're going to love this, but expecting fathers have a 50% decrease in free and bound testosterone. They have a 3-fold increase in estrogen. Whew! The only positive thing that's here about being an expecting father is, you're going to expect a kid. Very nice. And also your cortisol levels begin to decrease by about 2-fold. This is also nice. Now, to all my fathers out there watching this, or expecting fathers, they got that dad bod, that chub, tub. If you get these names called out to you, send them this way. The science speaks for itself. Another interesting thing that I think we all know deep down is illness or sickness actually decreases your levels of testosterone. And how it does this is through the effects caused by cytokines, and specifically an inflammatory protein known as interleukin 6. And so cytokines are little proteins that float around, and they're always just waiting, ready to go, and they greatly help in signaling inflammatory mechanisms. And interleukin 6, which is one of the most common of them all, can actually decrease your levels of testosterone. Apnea can decrease your levels of testosterone. And what is apnea? Now, apnea just means the cessation of breathing, right? And it usually happens in your sleep, hence why sleep apnea. Now, there are various reasons why sleep apnea can occur, whether it's a mechanical problem in your respiratory system or obesity, but most likely the cause is obesity. Now, breathing through your nose versus your face can have drastic changes. We could talk about this. We can make an entire video about how breathing through your nose can affect. And I mean, I'll give you right off an example. It affects your facial structure. That's very, very surprising. But again, we don't have too much time for that. We're going to be focusing on testosterone here. We'll maybe keep that for later. If you're interested, let me know. I can make a video on that. So breathing through your nose increases the effectiveness of getting oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. Now, how does this affect it? How does carbon dioxide and oxygen affect my testosterone levels, just my breathing? It's done through cortisol. Again, our little friendly neighborhood stress hormone. And it does this by 2 points, and I want to break them down to you. So, higher retainment of carbon dioxide in the system will increase levels of cortisol. Okay, now keep that in mind. So, now we have that in mind. You need to understand that cholesterol can be turned into testosterone. It can be turned into a few things, but one of the things it can be turned into is cortisol. And so what happens during these reactions is they favor different pathways according to what's going on in the system, right? So if I'm bringing in or I'm retaining a lot of that carbon dioxide, the system will prefer to make cortisol instead of the testosterone, right? So this is how breathing can actually decrease your levels, or bad breathing can actually decrease your levels of testosterone. Let's jump into the scam culture of supplements. Now, this may trigger a lot of people. I am so excited for that. Please, let's argue in the comments. I would love to learn more about the scams of supplements. But I found this study where some legends, what they did was fantastic. They grabbed data from the internet, specifically from Google. They typed on Google T booster supplements, and they found 50, let's say 50 of the most common supplements, and from each of these supplements they got 109 unique components. They found data regarding those unique components and supplements, and they found some very interesting numbers. Firstly, they found that about 90% of these supplements promoted directly, boost testosterone or boost free testosterone. About 48% said feel or be stronger. 62% had build body lean mass or muscle mass, and 2% had promote healthy aging. These are on supplements. This is what they're saying. These legends found that 25% of those supplements had an increase in testosterone. Only 25% had data that showed that there was an increase in testosterone. 10% had data that shows a decrease in testosterone, which is pretty funny to me because these supplements are all about, they're positive and energy and testosterone. 10% of them showed that there was a decrease in testosterone. Now this is where it gets a bit bad. The remaining percent, which is about 65%, showed that there was no data. There was no data. There was nothing recorded. There was no science behind it. Nothing was done. They're just woo-haws out of their butts. Oh, fantastic. Also, many of the supplements have a much higher amount of minerals and vitamins, much more than what the FDA approves. Hello. Please do your research before you listen to influencers, fall for scams, buy ripoffs. It's just 10 minutes of research and you can find something that has some science backed behind it. Now, creatine, although the mechanism is not exactly clear, what it does is that it actually increases the susceptibility of certain reactions that can increase DHT. Now, what is DHT? DHT is dihydrotestosterone. It is what makes a man a man. It has a lot of the effects on your sexual characteristics. That includes, growing a beard, going bald, penis growth, etc. Bottom line is creatine will not directly increase your testosterone. It can do it indirectly though by boosting your performance at the gym or your workout session. It can boost your performance, and by doing that, it could increase your levels of testosterone. If you decide to use testosterone supplements, whether even steroids itself, I mean, that's your decision. If you decide to use anything that can affect your levels of hormones, please do your respective blood tests, and please do them in the morning because that will give you the most accurate measurement. Next up, we have herbs that affect your levels of testosterone. For centuries, mankind has always found plants to crunch, extract, boil, cook, rub, for medicinal purposes. For example, saffron can have anxiolytic and antidepressant effects. Curcumin can give pain relief to patients with arthritis. We have also cinnamon, which may aid in blood sugar regulation in patients with diabetes type 2. What about testosterone? Now for this segment, you're going to be catching me looking at the screen more often because some of the names of these herbs are I'm going to need some help. So first off, we start with Dr.Atilla, which shows promising signs to boost fertility and your levels of free testosterone. It has a slight aphrodisiac effect and a slight anti-estrogenic effect, if that's what you're interested in. We have Plucinitia conifera. It has shown to increase your levels of antioxidants and testosterone. Unfortunately, this herb was only tested on rats. We have a more common one called fenugreek seed extract, also sold as Furosap 250 mg. It has some promising results as well. In a study of young men between the age of 18 and 30, 12-week supplementation of fenugreek was associated with a 23% increase in total testosterone. Not bad. Ashwagandha extract, also known as Shodan on the market, with 8 weeks of supplementation showed a 16.6% increase in testosterone. Ashwagandha's other brand name is KSM 66. It showed a 17.3% increase in testosterone. Now, I couldn't find why they did this next herb. They tested on just obese men, but nevertheless, 500 milligrams of forskolli in obese men between the ages of 18 and 37 showed a 13.6% increase in testosterone. There are a few supplements out there that can indirectly increase your levels of testosterone. So we have human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. We have a little shrub in Nigeria called Phaedogia agrestis. Now these two can increase your levels of luteinizing hormone. Now let's go back to our little pathway we talked about, the hypothalamic pituitary axis pathway. Now because luteinizing hormone plays both sides of the park, meaning that in women it can increase the levels of estrogen, and in men it will increase the levels of testosterone. But again, luteinizing hormone is a common compound. So in the pathway, before it comes down to the testes or the ovaries, it can, at a certain amount that you take, it can increase the levels of testosterone and estrogen respectively, and does this by ratios. So if I'm a biological male and I take a supplement that can increase my levels of luteinizing hormone, it will increase it like this. And if I was a biological female with my estrogen here and my testosterone here, and I take a luteinizing hormone supplement, it's going to increase my ratios like this, right? Ladies and gentlemen, if you've come this far, I do really appreciate you and thank you for watching and or listening. Let's close this out by looking at the summary of our points. So we talked about the hormones in general, the introduction into hormones, where they can be produced. We talked about testosterone, its various forms. We talked about the rise in anabolic steroid use and abuse, the effects of having low testosterone and high testosterone, what can improve your levels of testosterone, what can decrease your levels of testosterone, the scam culture of supplements, various herbs that can affect your levels of testosterone, and here we are. So thank you for watching. You can support me without even paying by liking, subscribing, checking out my other social media platforms in the description down below. Please use the comments to ask, add, argue even. I'm ready for that. If you wanna say hello, please do. You've been watching Dr. Attilla. Stay safe, practice health, and say no to steroids.